Minasan konnichiwa and welcome to the Board Game Dojo's Board Game Tyson, where we take a look at games that you might be looking at buying for a similar purpose and telling you which one is more worth your hard-earned money. Today's category is an important one to me, and that is introduction games to climbing and shedding. And we are taking a look at two games that either on a previous podcast or a previous YouTube video, we have already told you that we recommend. Shogakukan's Pin Combi Trio and Portland Game Collective and Game Noah's 535. Whoa, this is gonna be a tough one, so let's get it started. Hajime! The first thing to do is define what even is a climbing and shedding game.
All a climbing game means is that players will go around the table trying to play higher cards than the card that is on the table. We call this middle section a meld. So, for example, in traditional games, if the player before me plays a 9, then I just need to play a card that is higher than a 9, like a 10. And in a shedding game, the object is to get rid of all the cards in your hand. So if this is the last card in my hand, and I get to play this for the win, I now win. Pin Combi Trio changes up this formulation by giving you 3 kinds of plays you can do. A 1-card play, called a pin, a 2-card play, called a combi, and a 3-card play, called a trio. With this one just being whatever value that it is, and you beat it by playing a higher value, which you just saw me do here, climbing, so 50 higher than 37. The combi is 2 in a row, which can be beat by playing a higher 2 in a row, like a 63, 64. Now the interesting thing is the trio. What matters is not the value on the cards, what matters is the difference. So for this one, it's +2. So in order to beat it, to climb, if you will, then you need to play one with a higher difference, like this one, that is +3.
You go around and try to get rid of all of your cards until somebody does, and that person wins. That's about it. That's about the extent of Pin Combi Trio. Now, 535 offers a bit more complexity and a bit more rules, but not overbearingly so. It's still light enough to use as an introductory game. So I'm not going to go over all the rules here, but let me show you at least the 2 most interesting parts of it. In 535, like in Pin Combi Trio, there are 3 kinds of cards that you can play. A 1-card play, a 2-card play, or a 3-card play. In this game, we call it a single, a set, and a run. Now in 535, for a single is beaten by a card that's higher, so 14 higher than a 9. Same thing for a pair, or a set, be beaten by a higher one. But here's where we get to the first interesting thing about 535. Because typically I would need to have a higher run than this, but a higher run in this game is actually lower. The lower cards are actually stronger than the higher ones. So a run of 3, 4, 5 beats a run of 11, 12, and 13. Here's where we get to the other interesting point of 535. Now you can see that there's a pair of 12s down on the table, and looking at my hand, there is really nothing that I can do. I cannot beat that. But I actually have a 12 in my hand. So instead of beating a pair of 12s, what I can do is I can add this 12 to the pair. And now I have a 3 of a kind, which means the player after me needs to beat a 3 of a kind 12s. A round ends once somebody sheds their entire hand, and everybody else will look at the cards that they have left in their hand and look at this small number here. That is how many points that they get. So this one is worth 2 points. This one is worth 1 point, for example. And they will take these chips to keep track of their score. Once a player reaches 20 of these points, the game is over. Whoever has the least amount of points wins. Hopefully that brief overview was helpful, but if you want a full rules breakdown, I will link to the Pin Combi Trio that we have on our YouTube down in the description below, but I'll also link to a full rules breakdown of 535 since we haven't had a YouTube video about that one. Now it's important to point out that neither one of these games is specifically really advertised to be an introduction game to climbing and shedding. It's just that over the years, 535 has filled that void really well, and last year's Pin Combi Trio is suddenly there to fill it as well. So we're not really taking a look at what is the better game per se. We're actually just taking a look at these 2 games and seeing what is better for the purpose of introducing people to climbing and shedding.
And for those purposes, we are going to take a look at 4 categories and compare these 2 games. The first one is art and components, because it's important to make it look attractive that people want to play the game. They want to be introduced to a new genre, and they want it to not look scary at least. The second one is ease of learning and ease of teaching. Now, oftentimes these go together, and I think that it's really important that a good introduction game is easy for people to not only grasp the rules, but for the teacher to teach the game. If the game is impossible to teach, it can be a little bit scary for new players because they'll think it's impossible for them to learn. The third one is strategy, and this might be a little bit different than what you might be thinking. I don't mean strategy of which game has more strategy. What I want from an introduction game is a game that teaches strategies that they can then apply to another game in the genre. Because it's great if a game has tons of strategy, but if it's only strategy that they can use for that game, doesn't make a very good introduction game, because then I have to find another game in the future in the same genre that can then teach them how to do skills in that genre of game. And lastly, we're looking at replayability. Of course, we're looking at introduction games here, but it would be nice to have a game that can grow with you, not just introduce somebody to the genre, play it once or twice, and then say, okay, let's move on to something else. It'd be nice if you, when you spend your money on something, if you get a lot of use out of that game. So let's start by taking a look at the art from both of these games. Now, I think it's important to point out that the marketing, the target audience for both of these games are actually just completely different cultures. Pin Combi Trio and its art by Kokonasu and Rumba are really targeting people who live in Japan and probably grew up or are growing up in Japan. And it's for this reason that they use this very caricature style of comedians that people have seen on TV, whether it's the comedian themselves or famous characters that they have played. And while we can appreciate how well done the caricature style is and how quirky it makes the game feel, it's about as appreciated as a game themed around Ted Lasso would be over there, since it's not popular over there. We can appreciate the art, but it's not going to attract us to the game. While at the same time, 535's art by Sai Beppu is a more internationally, objectively good piece of art. Neither game is super thematic. There's not going to be anything there, so we're not even going to talk about any kind of thematic ties to it. But 535 and Sai Beppu really keep the weather kind of art style going with nice little details as to, oh, in the rainy weather, there's people doing rainy weather activities. In the sun, people are looking happy playing around on those cards. And overall, the design is kept consistent throughout. And that can be true, and that's true of Pin Combi Trio as well. So let's go a little bit to the components. Pin Combi Trio costs around $18, and it feels like it. The box is this really thin paper that's probably going to collapse if you try to transport it at all. Whereas 535 is a smaller box. Everything has this nice glossy finish, including the little chips that come with the game, and the box is sturdy. It's a little bit more expensive, not a whole lot more, but a little bit more expensive, and it really feels like it. Overall, Sai Beppu continues to impress with her kawaii but not overly cute style of art that is pleasing to the eye and makes playing it a joy. While Pin Combi Trio's art by Kokonasu and Rumba does a very good job and is good art for what it's supposed to be, YouTube is telling me that I'm talking to people in the US, Europe, and Oceania who probably didn't grow up or are in Japan, and so probably don't know these characters. They're both good pieces of art, but I have to give the edge to 535. Secondly, let's talk about the ease of teaching and the ease of learning. I mean, it's really important to make sure that somebody who is new to the genre can figure out what you're trying to say and can pick up on it so that they can have fun from the word go. I think Pin Combi Trio is really aimed at this category, so maybe it's a bit unfair to compare the two, because Pin Combi Trio is released by a kids book publisher. This was meant to be for families. It's pretty obvious from having Taiki Shinzawa, somebody who is so famous for throwing a wrench in any conventions of trick-taking and making these complex trick-takers, suddenly making a game with very few rules and a very tiny rulebook. At this point, I can teach this game in about a minute, and throughout the game, nobody's really asking any questions, even if it's their first time. They're able to pick up on it because there's really only a couple rules. You play one of the things or you pass. And from there, there's no weird additional rules. I'm not going to say that 535 is overly complicated, but compared to something like that, it definitely is. Now, the PGC version of 535 comes with a very nice player aid that really helps out, and I don't really have to further explain too much because players, even if they have a question, usually it's just answered on that little player aid in front of them. But there is a player aid that is needed. There are these little rules that can be forgotten about, or just in the sense that new players have to grasp the fact that, okay, there are these singles and then there are these pairs, and those are from low to high. And then the runs are from high to low. Just that little wrench in there starts to complicate things. Then you throw in the rule of 8s, and then you throw in when a meld is automatically finished because all of the numbers have played. Those just little tiny rules, which again are very nicely written on a player aid, it starts to make it feel a bit more difficult to learn and a bit more intimidating. And for the teach, it just adds a little bit more. Again, I want to point out that neither one of these games are overly difficult to teach or overly difficult to learn for the most part, but I definitely had more luck with people quickly being able to understand the rules and just get into it with Pin Combi Trio than I have with 5-3-5. So this category is going to Pin Combi Trio. Alright, we're halfway done, and let's start talking about strategy. And I want to reiterate that when I talk about strategy, it's not which game has more strategy in it. What I'm talking about is which game has more applicable skills that players learn so that they can take those strategies and skills that they learned from this game and apply it to future climbers and shedders that they play. Because that's the point of introducing them to the genre, to get them to want to play more of them. So let's start off with Pin Combi Trio because it is a lot more straightforward. Pin Combi Trio doesn't offer that many choices in its game. It is play or pass. There is a 1 card, a 2 card, and a 3 card. And quite quickly, when it gets to your turn, you're going to be able to figure out what you can do. And even before then, you're going to be figuring out, okay, maybe this is not a round that I want to join. And what that does is it limits the amount of choice, which to some people is not going to be a good thing. But for somebody trying to learn what the genre is, it can be a little bit beneficial actually, because it offers them enough choice to make them feel clever. There is enough room here to make smart plays. There's enough choice here in which you're going to have to learn how to read your hand. Okay, is this card going to be more effective as a 1 card play, a 2 card play, or a 3 card play? And there's learning what a smart pass is. Okay, yes, I technically could play this, but I'm saving this for a 3 card play later, so I'm going to skip right now. There is learning that, but there's not so much choice that it is overwhelming, and it means that more people can effectively make clever plays from their very first game than not. Okay, and now let's go on to 5-3-5. And 5-3-5 is so interesting because there are 2 things that make this game interesting. There are the 2 big hooks that drive people to trying this game. And as we went over before, that's adding cards to the middle that you didn't think were even going to be relevant, but suddenly are going to make the meld stronger, and the fact that there is no such thing as really a bad card in your hand, because whether you have a high card or a lot of low cards, it's going to be powerful in some way. Now this is probably why 5-3-5, even for experienced players, is so divisive, because it offers a lot of freedom. It offers a lot of choice. Now, it kind of reminds me of the choice paradox, which was a psychological study done that the more choice we have, the less content we are. And this is pretty paradoxical to what we think. But it kind of feels that way with 5-3-5. It can feel a bit overwhelming because there's so many ways to use even a single card. Let's rule out the 8s for right now because that has their own special purpose to it. But if I have something like a 2, okay, well, for many card games, that's not going to be a very good card, but just in 5-3-5, I can think of, okay, well, that can be the single card, that's fine, it's pretty low. It could be a pair of 2s, which is, again, pretty low, but it could be a very high run. I could also keep it because I know I only have 1, 2 in my hand, and so that means that somebody else at the table has all the other 2s, and so that means that I have the possibility that if I keep it, I can make it like a 3 of a kind 2, or a 4 of a kind 2, or make it a nice run by adding that to something there. That is a lot to think about. That very thing is what keeps 5-3-5 so fresh and so interesting to so many people, and we're going to talk about that in the next category, which is replayability. But that's not the purpose of what we're here for today. We're here to talk about introductions. And to some, this is going to be exciting. To others, it's going to be too much choice. They're going to say, I have no idea of any strategy. I'm literally just going to try to beat whatever's on the table, and that's it. And they stop learning the skills that you want them to learn so that they can play something else. Because I've had more success with people coming away from the game feeling clever, coming away with skills that they want to then apply to something more complicated, I'm going to give the point to Pin Combi Trio. Well, this is interesting because now we're down to the last category, which is replayability. Again, we want a game that, especially if for Pin Combi Trio, you need to import it, we want a game that's going to have a shelf life, right? So let's go over it. I played both of these games. I think I've played 5-3-5 a bit more, but both of them over 20 to 25 times for sure. And so I have a good idea as to how much I want to be playing these games more. Pin Combi Trio has a very good purpose as an introductory game for climbing and shedding. But I think I might be done with it. Pin Combi Trio effectively achieves its purpose of introducing concepts to new players to climbing and shedding. After a few plays, people are ready to move on to something else, something more crunchy, something more complex. In fact, I've had many people go from Pin Combi Trio to 5-3-5, which is an interesting point in and of itself. Whereas 5-3-5, I have people who are still enamored with it after 10, 15 plays. In fact, I still am enamored with it. Every time that I introduce it to somebody new, I get excited to play it again. And the fact that I'm still excited about it even as an introductory game, but even more to it, it feels like 5-3-5 grows with you. As I've gotten better at climbers and shedders, I've gotten better at 5-3-5. Whereas I don't really feel like Pin Combi Trio is going to have a super long shelf life for me. In fact, I now only play it with people who are brand new to the genre and not really anyone else. Point, definitely 5-3-5. This is the worst. It's the worst when you go online trying to compare two products that you want to buy and it comes up with a tie. They're both good. And unfortunately, that's what we have here. But I think I can actually summarize it in one question. Who are you introducing these games to? And your answer on that is actually going to be which game you should buy. Because we've already covered that both of these games are good, if not great. But it all depends on who you're playing it with. If you're introducing somebody who is not really into games or don't really want to learn a whole lot of rules to something, maybe you're trying to play with all sorts of an age range, well, Pin Combi Trio is probably your best bet. Whereas on the other hand, if you're introducing this to somebody who has played a game with you before, or already knows that maybe they like card games, then I think 5-3-5 is your better bet. And this kind of is illustrated by the success levels that I've had with both of these games. For my family, Pin Combi Trio has been a lot better. Mostly because they just don't want to sit there listening to me describe these little fine rules that are there. Again, not overbearingly so, but they are more to keep in your head. There's also the sense that in 5-3-5, you don't want to gain points, and so every time you have a bad round, you can see how bad of a round you played. And that can be a little bit demotivating from somebody who is trying to learn the genre for the first time. Whereas for 5-3-5, for people who have maybe already played a game like it, for somebody who maybe has played the Crew, maybe if your family enjoyed the Crew before, and they're like, oh, what else do you have? Or your friends who maybe have played other types of board games with you, or card games with you, they will be more interested in the complexities of 5-3-5, the hooks that make 5-3-5 so special 10 years, 11 years after it came out. And so I think ultimately I have to, unfortunately, leave the decision to you. It all depends on you. Are you going for simplicity or are you going for complexity? Are you going for initiation or are you going for replayability? And I hope that I've given you enough information in this video to make that choice a little bit easier. Thank you so much for watching today. Arigatou gozaimashita. Until next time, じゃあね